Hello and good evening and welcome to the final week of WoWFEST lockdown, and what an incredible week it's going to be. We have joining us Professor Phil Scraton, who people will know is the author of the Hillsborough Report. We've got Muslim drag queen Amaru Al-Kahadi with their brilliant book Unicorn, comedian and activist Francesca Martinez, along with her brother, philosopher Rahul Martinez, and as ever, they will be questioning the status quo. For the little ones, we've got Natalie Reeves and the theatre company Travelling Companions, and then a spectacular finish on the 31st of May, with Jeremy Corbyn issuing a call to arts, followed by Liverpool's own internationally renowned urban griot, Levi Tafari. I'm Madeleine Hanigan, one of the co-directors of Writing on the Wall, and it's lovely to have you here joining us tonight. I know it's a beautiful evening, but it's going to be great. You won't be missing much outside. So, don't forget, you can join us in this conversation, and we're very keen to hear your points of view and any questions that you have. And tonight's discussion is entitled Building a Better World, Art and Civil Responsibility. Because really the pandemic has shone a light on the way that arts and arts organisations are central to our society, to our very existence, really. And during this pandemic, the arts have really stepped up to keep people and communities connected, stimulated, and, you know, we've really taken care of people's mental well-being and also physical health. And some of the initiatives promise to have a long-lasting transformation in terms of artistic practice and production. But at the same time, arts venues and institutions are facing financial collapse, while artists, writers, musicians, those that are the creators of art, in the main freelancers, are the most economically vulnerable. And the response of the funders to this situation has been good and has been swift. In Liverpool, our own city council moved quickly to ensure that arts organisations like Writing on the Wall has our this year's funding moved through very quickly. Other national funders have made emergency funds available, including Arts Council England, which opened a emergency funding application of 160 million. But the question is this enough? Just this weekend, Rufus Norris, the artistic director of the National, predicts that by Christmas, 70% of theatres around the country will go bust. In Liverpool, we've been very fortunate to have a city council that understands the value of culture. Our Mayor Anderson famously said, culture is the rocket fuel of the economy. But with the artistic sector being the last businesses, because of the way we operate, because we bring people together into buildings, we're going to be the last businesses to fully come out of lockdown. So what is the fate not only of the cultural economy, but of that whole non-artistic supply chain, restaurants, hotels, security firms? I could go on. Industries that are dependent on and support that economy. And joining me tonight are Claire McColgan and Lynn Gardner, who are going to help us explore some of the questions around the survival and the performance of the cultural sector right now. Claire is the director of Culture Liverpool, and since 2009, she's had responsibility for legacy, major events, the Liverpool Film Office, Cruise Liverpool, tourism, city halls, and cultural policy. And she spearheaded multi-award winning events, including Royal Deluxe's much-loved giant spectaculars, the Three Queens and One Magnificent City. And she's a national advisor on a range of boards, including for Arts Council England. Lynn Gardner is an award-winning theatre and performance writer, journalist. She currently writes for Stage Door and The Stage, where she's the associate editor. She's formerly written for The Guardian and The Independent, and she's a founder member of City Limits, a magazine that I really loved when I was living in London. And City Limits is the largest publishing co-op in Europe. Lynn's also published 13 novels for children. But before I kind of turn over my questions to Lynn and Claire, I want to kind of give a perspective from where Cool is at, or the smaller organisations, the smaller arts organisations in Liverpool, many of whom belong to Cool. If you've not heard of Cool, we're the creative organisations of Liverpool. We have about roughly about 30 members, and we're the kind of organisations that perhaps most of us don't have venues, but we're very integrated in communities, and we reflect the diversity of those communities. All of the genres are represented within Cool: dance, theatre, film, visual art, literature, and many of the city's festivals. Africa Oye, the largest African music festival in Europe, the Liverpool Irish Festival, and the Arabic Festival. Many festivals cancelled after months, a year of hard work putting programmes together. But despite that, there was a very quick shift to home working, and despite the need to furlough some of the staff, these organisations have continued to operate. We made a very early commitment to support our community of artists, recognising that freelancers are the most vulnerable. Contracts, whether written or verbally agreed, have been honoured, and many organisations have spent time supporting artists in application to organisations like Arts Council England. And also, we made a very early commitment to support the most vulnerable in our community. Cool members have been involved in cooking and delivering meals to local households, keeping in regular contact with those most vulnerable that they work with, and recognising that we are actually in a mental health emergency. And in response to that, a host of activities were moved online. Very quickly, our digital skills were up, and we've been delivering online, many of us, since the lockdown began. And these activities have been vital, and I'd just like to share some feedback from one of our project participants on our Right to Work programme, which is aimed at long-term unemployed adults. And this is what one woman has said: "We've been very lucky to have had some great course tutors this year, and I'm ever so grateful to have been able to continue this course online throughout the pandemic. This has been somewhat of a lifesaver through these very lonely and tough times." And that's just not about writing on the wall. That is about the role that the arts sector is playing right now during this pandemic. And we do understand the limitations of our reach, so Cool continues to lobby for the universal provision of internet, recognising that those without internet, with the closure of libraries, are perhaps most vulnerable. We also recognise the disproportionate effects of COVID on Black and racial minority communities, on women stuck at home with violent partners, those living in the poorest communities. We recognise that because these are the communities that we operate in, and which many of us are a part of. And these concerns are reflected in the programming. You'll certainly see them reflected in the programme of WoW's Lockdown Festival. Though all of this great work continues, many of the organisations are struggling financially and now face an uncertain future, particularly those who are not regularly funded by Arts Council England, some of which haven't received the emergency funding. And so at the weekend, it was great to see the national press talking about the fate of cultural institutions without a significant injection of cash. And it's a good thing. This focus is a good thing, but there's also a sense that this attention is brought about by the fact that the big London institutions are facing the crisis. So how do we have more, not just of a regional approach, but also a focus on the small organisations that are operating within those regions outside of the capital? And I was hoping that Lynn and Claire will be on screen so I could put that question to them.
We can see you, Madeleine.
Oh, you can see me. Okay, I can't see you. Lovely. Okay, so I'm actually going to start with you, Claire. How do we bring the focus both to the regions and those smaller grassroots organisations within them? I know that you've been working on the cultural recovery. You've been working on cultural recovery planning, not just for the city, but for the region, and to offer government, to make an offer to government based on our cultural recovery. So over to you, Claire.
Thanks, Madeleine. I mean, when you kind of just listening to you talk, it's shocking, isn't it? I mean, we've had that's a real small word, but actually it's shocking what everyone's gone through. I mean, who would have thought? It's never been any of my risk assessments as the word pandemic been in any of them, you know. So we stopped everything in the City Council, you know, all the events that we do within 4 days. So we went from a full calendar with all the festivals that you've talked about, with everything that you've just said, to really nothing, you know, over the space of 3 weeks. And that's shocking for a city that loves its culture so much. You know, the city loves coming out for stuff. It embraces it. It loves it. It has done since I've been here for the last 30 years. But over the last 10 years, it's not only worked with local communities and worked with local people, it's also attracted massive amount of visitors as well. And so the visitor economy, which has come because of that real strong core of cultural activity, is also now on its knees. So those little bars, those restaurants, those people that had a dream of setting up their own cafe, all that at the moment is on hold, isn't it? And that's people's livelihoods. And the people that work in the cultural sector, they don't do it for the money. They do it because they're completely passionate about the work that they do, and they believe in the work that they do. And I think what's going to be really interesting in the next 7 months, and what I hope is not going to happen, I think it's great that the big London organisations are starting to lobby. You can see that coming through. You can see it coming through the press. But there's got to be a national picture here. There can't just be the big London organisations, you know, not surviving. There has got to be a whole sector by sector approach to what's happening. So I guess theatres, for example, will open last. You know, that's looking quite likely. Will they open before Christmas? I don't know. I haven't got the solution to that. But if they're not open, the Philharmonic's not open in Liverpool, what then happens to those restaurants, those bars, those food places that kind of have grown up around their success? So culture does two things. One, it kind of binds communities together and it gives people a voice who've never had a voice. But it also gives the city a voice that struggled to have a voice for a very, very long time. And it's given us a really, really strong national voice. The work that collectively we've done has given us, you know, out of everywhere, Edinburgh, London, Liverpool, you know, Liverpool, I think those cities kind of sing a song, don't they, that people understand the words to. And that's really, really important. I think we're going to have a battle on, if I'm really honest, because there's not going to be enough money to go around. And I don't think anyone can think that there is. I think things will change. The organisations that are the most fleet of foot and the most ready to, I think, probably embrace something that no one thought was going to happen, that could be quite interesting. The work that you're doing here kind of online, you know, getting yourself together and putting everything online, that must have been really hard, but you had to turn your heads to that. really quickly. We've started from the very beginning focus groups with the cultural sector and the visitor economy sector and the creative industries to start thinking what we do when this ends, because they're the lifeblood of our city. I mean, there's 60,000 people employed by the visitor economy across the region. You lose half of those, you've got 30,000 people unemployed. That's really, really serious. So we have to think about how we can best get the city back up on its feet safely, and that's the most important point. You know, we are in a health pandemic. This is first primarily about health, but then we have to start getting the economy moving again, and we have to start getting people out, the people you talked about that are lonely, that are scared, that are frightened. Culture can bring those together in a way that very few other things can. So I think that's kind of what we've got to do. I think what's really good about Liverpool, and is not the same everywhere else, really clearly not the same, is the fact that organisations come together in really incredible ways. So the cool network that you talked about, the LARC network, which is the bigger organisations, the visitor economy networks come together. They are talking in sectorally about how to best get the best for Liverpool. But I would really like to see a citywide approach to resources happening, like what's happened with high streets and other things. It'd be good to have kind of a city and a region wide approach to how we ask for money, how we're given money, and what we're going to do. But my fear is there's just not going to be enough to go around. You know, if you're looking at those numbers that the big arts organisations in London are talking about, what then happens when you have 15 regional theatres, and then you have, and what we can't let happen is the smaller organisations, those organisations that bring so much joy to people, be the last in the line for this as well. So I think it's going to be really tough. City Council has been amazing over the last 10 years through really 65% of our budget's been cut, yet we've supported culture all the way through. That won't change, but I think the networks that we're creating now will be really great for the future in terms of how we respond to what happens when we all go back.
Thanks a lot, Clara. I'll come back to your crucial point about not enough money to go round. But for now, I'll bring Lynn in. Lynn, you've been really supportive of the theatre and the arts nationally outside of just the London bubble. So I'd just be very interested in your perspectives on the challenges being faced now nationally by arts organisations, and any lessons that we can perhaps learn in Liverpool.
Well, I think the challenges being faced by arts organisations at the moment are absolutely substantial. You know, Rufus Norris is absolutely correct when he talks about the fact that potentially 70% of those arts organisations across the country will go to the wall, and they will go to the wall really quickly unless there is help from the government. And I think the thing to actually kind of remember is actually, I mean, I think that what Liverpool does is absolutely fantastic, and that it is much more networked than many other major cities or areas of the UK. I remember once Claire saying to me that one of the things that she thought that what Liverpool did was it provided hope through culture. And I think that is a really important thing for any city or any region of the UK. And I also think that it's really important to remember that the arts also help people live longer, feel happier, have better mental health, you know, and that is one of the roles. So I think the thing that, you know, the arts have a role of being useful. Yeah, it's actually not just about what it is that you put on your main stage or what big exhibition that you are hanging on your walls. It's a much bigger thing about how you are involved in people's everyday lives and embedded in the communities of the town or the city or the region in which those arts organisations operate. And one of the things I guess that I feel really strongly at the moment is that in a sense, and you know, I'm really wary about sounding kind of crass, because I think it's such a difficult situation. And as Claire says, nobody ever thought, you know, nobody planned. They planned for lots of things, but not for a pandemic and a close down of pretty well all arts organisations. And I don't want to sound crass when I turn around and say, you know, this is a terrible thing, and the catastrophe staring the arts in the face is genuine and real. You know, people are not crying wolf. But I also think that it is a real opportunity to really rethink what it is that we do, and why we do it, and who we do it with. And I think it's about that difference between arts for people and arts made with people. And therefore actually whether they can be co-authors of that, and whether in fact actually the artists and the community are genuine collaborators in some way. And I think one of the best things that can actually often happen in that is about arts organisations actually recognising that they need to step aside. Madeleine Hanigan, who used to run the Bush Theatre and then was briefly at the South Bank, he talked about, you know, arts organisations being having to be really, really aware that they are not the protagonists in the stories of their communities. You know, they are there in order to work with often those volunteer-led small, quiet organisations which are already on the ground and already know exactly what it is that is happening, and that is how the arts need to operate.
Oh, have we lost Lynn there? She
will. Yes.
Oh, there you are. You're back again.
Sorry. Yeah. It's an opportunity for everyone to get off the hamster wheel and perhaps rethink what it is they do and why they do it.
Thanks, Lynn. I mean, I'm really pleased to hear you talk about organisations that are not arts driven. Writing on the Wall has got a long history of partnering with non-artistic as well as artistic organisations, and we feel it's really crucial to the quality of the work that we produce. But in terms of, and I think there's a lot of organisations of our size that do that, but in terms of arts planning and strategy and policy, I was reading an article at the weekend that you'd written, and you talk about those who are making the big decisions around the arts are not really reflective of the local communities. They tend to be senior people in large organisations. And you made the point that while we're planning our way out of this crisis, the conversation needs to be much wider. And I know, just to bring you into this, Claire, I know that from our experience of Capital of Culture, you know, absolutely understand the centrality of the community to a successful arts offer, but really quite practically, how do we do that? How do we break out of, right now it's private Zoom chats, how do we break out of those Zoom rooms and invite more people around those policy making tables? Should I go to you first, Lynn, because it was sparked by your article, and then maybe Claire can come in.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is an issue. I think that one of the things that in exactly the same way that the crisis, the pandemic, that what it has done is that it's highlighted the inequalities in our society. And one of the things that it's highlighted is that often it is those people who are on the front line of the NHS, in care homes, who are bus drivers, you know, those very people who are paid least, and you know, often valued least at all, have been the people actually who have been keeping us safe and who have proved that actually they are of most use. And I think that there is something that happens in the arts, and particularly in the area that I know best, which is theatre, is this rather odd thing that the pandemic has highlighted, which is that it is actually freelance artists without whom the big institutions and buildings could not exist, who are most vulnerable. And many of them have absolutely slipped through the cracks of the self-employed schemes and actually have ended up with nothing at all from that scheme for a number of reasons, not least actually because either they simply do not earn enough from the theatre because they are extremely low paid, or in fact because they often have other jobs in the hospitality industry, which has also gone under, on which they are they are on 0 hours contracts but on PAYE, and so therefore actually you know, buildings have been furloughed, the staff in buildings have been furloughed, and yet it is the artists who you know, are sort of vulnerable and suffering most. And those are also the people who work directly with communities in, you know, whether that is kind of making art or helping those communities actually spark their own creativity. And I think actually it wasn't me, it was David Byrne put it extremely well. He's the artistic director of the New Diorama Theatre. And he said, we like to think as kind of a theatre industry that we are nothing like Uber, which has no cars, or Deliveroo, which has no kitchens, you know, but we are, theatre is an industry of buildings and institutions who actually have no artists. And so I would say that one of the things that I think we really need to think about.
I don't think we might have lost Lynn again, but you might well.
About artists.
Thanks, Lynn. You did go a little bit funny at the end there, but I think we got the gist of your final sentence. Claire, are you ready to jump in?
No, I am. Can I just ask Lynn just a quick question just on that last bit?
Yeah.
Is that all right? Just
Yeah.
Lynn, what did you mean? But because we lost you a little bit, and I'm really interested in that. Did you talk about buildings being the problem, really, and artists not?
No, I'm not saying that buildings are the problem, but I think that what has happened during the pandemic is that it has highlighted the fact of the inequalities that exist between buildings and institutions, yes, and the artists who work with the communities and make the art that goes into those buildings. So I think we need to look to our own kind of inequalities as well as the wider inequalities in society.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting because obviously we've got a lot of buildings in Liverpool that are cultural buildings. You know, we've got a lot of this, we've got a lot of galleries, we've got a lot, and they are our pride and joy. Really, those buildings are part of the city. They're part of the fabric of the city. They're part of the history of the city. But actually, they're going to cost an awful lot of money to be in hibernation for a very long time. I mean, that's what kind of all the news is now. Whereas the more kind of fleet of foot artists, you know, getting stuff out of buildings and into streets and into parks and in communities, I think is really interesting. And one of the things we're looking at, there's lots of recovery groups happening everywhere at the moment, but in the city, and there's one called the community. They're all called cells. So I've got a culture vista economy and something else cell, and but there's a community cell, and and Alicia Smith, who works with me, is sitting on that community cell now, because I think the cultural organisations, especially those that deal with people who are on the edge of everything, have got so much to offer in terms of just rebuilding our communities after this. You know, they're in there anyway, they're doing loads of stuff anyway, but sometimes that's seen as the arts. So it's seen as something quite separate to actually, you know, really having really strong mental health, having really strong physical health, having really strong sense of identity about who you are in your place. And we did that really well Madeleine said, during Capital Culture, we had a huge creative community programme. I'm really proud of it. But I think probably over the last 10 years, because we've had to fight for budget so much, everything has been about the economic return on things. It's had to be, otherwise our budgets would have gone, to be quite frank, because you're competing internally within a council of, you know, you kind of have to kind of choose your place, and we chose that place and we've done very well in it. But I think what's been really interesting about stopping, like literally having to close down over 5 days, is the things that have become more obvious. So things like the food hub, which my team are now running, you know, their event skills are brilliant. They're running the food hub, they're running the volunteer program. We had 3,000 people volunteer. You see the stuff that happens on a Thursday night with Clap for Carers, which has been incredible. If you listen to the flats in Sefton Park, which I live near, every night at 9 o'clock they sing You'll Never Walk Alone, and they're singing, people are singing and they're playing instruments, and that's a massive national, I think, cultural, emotional event. And I think that's what sport always gets this right. Sport is brilliant at talking about its grassroots activity and its Premier League, very, you know, very expensive, very, you know, it talks about it really well. It's really good at campaigning. We're not like that in the arts. We don't do it well at all. So we have to have people in boxes. You know, you're a community artist, you work at the RSC, you know, that. And I think probably what's happened over the last, and what we should really build on that's happened over the last 8 weeks, is those lines have become blurred, because the things that are the most beautiful is someone banging a saucepan outside your house on a Thursday night that makes you well up, or something that's come on the internet, a song that someone's singing about. And those little things I think will make a massive difference. And for us in Liverpool, one of the key things we need to get out of this is, I always think organisations, arts organisations, can talk to communities in a completely different way than councils can. They can just get other stuff out of them. There's just a different approach to it, and we need to build on that. So what I'm hoping is those silos that we have within my own organisation will just be gone when we actually return, and that I think is a really positive thing to come from this. But I think the buildings thing is an issue, because if we're not careful, all our funding, not our funding particularly, but the government's funding, everyone's funding, will go on maintaining and keeping those organisations, those buildings. And I think that'll be a real challenge.
Thanks for that, Claire. I just want to continue on with buildings really, and go back to your point about there's not enough money to go around. And pose perhaps what might be a bit of a controversial question. It's actually came from David Jugg, the former director of Battersea Arts and Art Centre, and he's asking whether we should seize this moment really, whether we should do everything we can to sustain these giants of the sector, he means the buildings, or whether we should take the opportunities as they come to invest more public funds directly with artists and communities. So he's clearly pitting the buildings against the artists and the communities. Lynn, what's your view on that?
I mean, I think he's got a really strong point, because actually, you know, it comes back to the fact that it is all connected, and what we were talking about right at the beginning, which is it's absolutely fantastic that the plight of theatre is now kind of 9 weeks into lockdown, actually kind of you know, making it on the front page of newspapers. But the problem is that it is the potential, the fact that the National Theatre is talking about having to make a third of its staff redundant, is what kind of tends to hit the headlines. It's about the fact that the South Bank has said that it is not going to open again until spring of 2021. It's about the fact that the Donmar is saying that you know, it's going to have a problem going on, that the Old Vic is saying that it might go under. But those are big organisations, a mixture of the subsidised and of the commercial, but they're also London based. And I think the thing that we need to remember is this, and I suppose it comes back to the point about the inequalities between that has the crisis has revealed, about the fact that that artists are very seldom directly funded in any way and are part of the precariat as much as somebody is a Deliveroo, you know, biker is. And it's about the fact that, quite simply, if you go and save the National Theatre, the government says, we will put all the money into making sure that the National Theatre goes on. Actually, the National Theatre will be able to go on, but it will go on in an absolutely hobbled way, because what will happen is that simply it will not, over a period of months and years, have the artists necessary and with both the skills and the creative ingenuity that it needs to make great art and to be fully embedded within communities. So I think that one of the things that we need to think about is, where does the money go? Does it always have to go to the same places that it's always gone in the past? This is absolutely an opportunity for the Arts Council to think about renewing the portfolio in a really radical way. And I think that if that money does go into particular buildings or institutions, that we have to rethink what the role of those buildings and institutions is, both directly in their local communities, but also more widely as how it is that the quite considerable resources, never enough, but still considerable resources that they do have, are used to support the whole kind of theatre ecology, and that includes the artists.
Thanks, Lynn. Do you want to jump in, Claire?
Yeah, I just think the whole building, because obviously the work that I love the most is outdoor work, and that's what, you know, my absolute passion is, when it's free and it's outdoor and you just see people who've never engaged with culture before in any way, or don't think they have in any way, just being wowed by kind of things. And not quite sure when that's all going to start again, but you can't imagine, for example, the Giants happening, you know, but that was complete opposite, lots of crowds with people, you know, all of that. I think the challenge that we've got when you're in charge of a city, culturally, my job really is to balance those two things. So we need great work happening, and we need great work happening by the organisations that do it, and we support them to do that within communities and within the streets and all the festivals and all the stuff we do. But we've also got a very strong international load of organisations that have buildings, and the buildings are, you know, the majority of the buildings are in the city centre, but they're key hubs for economic activity around those buildings. So if you look at the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic, when it was on its knees, so was Hope Street. So all the jobs that have kind of come through those hotels, the restaurants and the bars opening up, and that fantastic feeling that it's got round there, I think you can marry the quality of the work, the artist work that happens in the Philharmonic, with the growth of the Hope Street area. So it's hugely complex. And obviously as a city council, we get loads of stuff about, oh, you fund this for this and you don't fund, but it's such a complex kind of ecology that it works in Liverpool. It works because we've got some fantastic grassroots organisations, but we've also got organisations that tour the world and take our name across the world and have done really great work. And when those organisations get less artistically, I think that's when you see the kind of community around them, if you like, kind of getting less as well. So I think cities are really complex, because I don't know, you look at the Tate. I mean, the interesting about Liverpool is that the regeneration of Liverpool, you think it started 30 years ago. They put the Tate, you know, the government decided to move Tate into the Albert Dock, and National Museums and the Maritime Museum started there at the same time. They chose culture to start the regeneration of this city. And I just think that kind of whole buildings, outdoor work thing, festival is a really interesting dynamic. I think if you can get it right, and I think we've got that right in Liverpool, we've got that balance right. But what I am worried about is that post this, that money gets sucked into buildings and there's not enough left, if that makes sense, for kind of really vibrant work that will make a difference, will change. But then part of me thinks as well, like that schools are going back some point in June, July, August, September. There's got to be kind of the cultural organisations, the way that we work in education, the way that artists can deal with education, that will all change, because actually there's going to be a load of kids going back in who are nervous, who are scared, who can't socially communicate with each other in the way that they're used to. And that's where the cultural sector could really make a massive difference, I think. They could step into those schools. They have not got buildings. They could use those schools as their auditorium, as their stage, and they could make a massive difference to those young people's lives, because we've got to find ways of being human throughout this. And actually, when you lose touch and you lose kind of when social distancing is so important and you lose touch, we've got to find ways of being able to communicate emotionally through this. And the arts does that brilliantly. Sorry, that was really rambling. Sorry, anyone's watching.
So it's a complex situation, really.
It really is.
And just in case anyone was wondering what that poster is behind Claire, it's the giant dog from Royal Deluxe Spectacular. That's how much she loves the outdoor events.
I do love outdoor work.
She's got the dog. Okay, I'm going to bring in the audience now, really. We've chinned on long enough. I've got one comment with a question here. What I hope is an increase of new work that's community-led, especially in theatre. But how likely is this, especially when most venues would want to guarantee lots of audiences, so therefore more likely to go back to the classics? And it's a similar point that I've heard elsewhere about, is the arts going to be taking less risk now as a result of the situation we find ourselves in? Lynn, do you want to pick that up?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I think there is a danger that that would be the case, but I think, you know, that would be a really terrible thing to happen. And I kind of think that theatres are alert to, you know, that if you play it safe, if you play it staid, if you stop taking any risks, then you're not actually, as an art form, really going to develop and push the boundaries. I mean, kind of interestingly, you know, I sometimes think this is not an argument for artists starving in garrets at all. You know, the arts needs more money, and part of the problem about the fact that it's in the state getting more earned income. So that, you know, is has been, you know, a real issue. So actually most big theatres now have 77% of their income is entirely earned. And of course, if you go back to that model, then actually the chances are that you will play it safe. But I suppose what I was going to say is that sometimes actually, you know, necessity can be the mother of invention. And funnily enough, only this morning, I was writing about Nicholas Nickleby, one of the great shows of the RSC, an absolutely groundbreaking show. And it only came about because actually they did not have enough money to put on the 3 Shakespeares that season that they otherwise would have done, and they just went, oh, we've got this amount of money, we will put all this money into doing one show, and that show turned out to be the legendary Nicholas Nickleby. So I think that theatres do have to, you know, have to be artistically adventurous. Otherwise, why bother, you know?
Yeah.
Thanks, Lynn. Claire, do you want to add to that?
Not really. Oh gosh, not well. No, Lynn said it. Lynn said it all. I think that apart from, will I just add? I think that theatres are going to have to change, aren't they? Anyway, in terms of their audience, the audience is going to be small for a bit. I mean, unless something dramatic happens, and it's going to be small until if they can open before Christmas. And I think that might necessitate what you do. So you could do stuff that's much more intimate, which might be quite interesting. And it was brilliant for me because the last show that I saw was Our Lady of Blundellsands at the Everyman, which was by Jonathan Harvey. But literally, it's the first time I've been to the theatre in ages. It was absolutely packed, and it was probably about 5 days before lockdown happened. Great writer, writes brilliantly for women, beautiful beautiful language, and to see the Everyman again, full of that sort of theatre that made it famous, but in a really contemporary new way, was a real wonderful thing to start. And I think that's what's challenging, because theatre's not been particularly healthy, I would say, for the last sort of 2 or 3 years. I mean, theatre's not been healthy in buildings. You know, organisations done brilliant work, but I kind of think economically theatre's been struggling for quite a while.
But I think that again comes back to that thing about buildings, and maybe one of the things that we need to kind of think about and talk about in terms of kind of artists, is a lot of those artists, those freelancers that I'm talking about, actually are really inventive and really ingenious, and actually don't necessarily want to work in a proscenium arch theatre, or is it, so I think we can expend lots and lots of energy of talking about how do we do social distancing in a West End theatre, or indeed in a traditional auditorium, let's say like the Playhouse, or indeed the Everyman. And of course the truth is that economically it doesn't work, because most theatres need to be full by at least 60% for the economic model on which they're based to work. And if you have social distancing, then it just goes out the window. It doesn't work at all. So my question would be, how can we be more inventive about how we might do shows in a different way and in a different context? And we've already seen Sheffield theatres coming out and saying that later in the summer that they're hoping that they will do Shakespeare out in parks in the open air. What about headphone shows? What about shows potentially in the longer term made in small communities, like in villages, and then performed in those villages, in village halls, where people would be in their own social bubble on their own table? I mean, there are all sorts of things that I think that we need to think about. And I think the danger about the conversation about just going, oh, it's how can theatre reopen in time to put the pantomime on, hugely important though that absolutely is it's about, again, about trying to find a economic solution to an economic problem. And it
we give Lynn a minute. It tends to cut out and then she's back with us again. You did cut out a little bit there.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is my dad's internet connection.
I know. I know you did say that. But I've got a comment came through that absolutely agrees with what you're saying. Local residents who say, could we have more outdoor plays to ensure social distancing, reducing isolation and improve mental health by distancing ourselves watching a production? So as I say, Claire, local residents, so I'll leave that one on. And another comment that's come in, I'm going to give you 2 questions because we're running out of time a little bit, so I'll pose 2 questions and you can answer whichever one or both. Somebody is saying, great to hear some points that we've been discussing. Do you think that the experience of the pandemic showing the value of arts on our mental health and well-being will be more valued in schools, and we might even get more fair pay for artists and everyone involved in creating and delivering? And then another one about, do you think that part of the regeneration, securing the stability of the theatre, will be dependent on more representation of different communities? So a question about schools' willingness, ability to pay for arts in schools, and one about more representation of communities. Who wants to jump in first with that?
I mean, I could talk about communities, just to really say, one of the things that I think is enormously concerning is that over the last few years, theatre has made sometimes you might describe it as glacial progress, but nonetheless, it has started to make considerable progress around diversity, and about the fact that actually that what it is that who runs our theatres, who makes art, and what that art looks like on our stages should be more representative of every taxpayer in the country and every community in the country. And I guess that one of my concerns around the pandemic is that, rather similarly to the idea that actually that you might have less interesting, less radical art, is that actually the slow move towards diversity will come to an abrupt halt. I think we've seen, and I've been around for long enough to absolutely know that every time that there is progress in this area, that that the gains are often very fragile and they are very easily wiped out. And this cannot in any sense be an excuse for theatre to become less diverse. We've already seen not just the creative advantages of diversity, but actually the huge dividends that diversity pays in terms of audiences, of not just different audiences, but broader and more audiences coming into your buildings if you're putting on kind of traditional theatre, and we need to keep that up.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. The work that some of the work that kind of I'm most inspired by is the work that 20 Stories High do. You know, I just think they're just incredible. And I can't remember when I met Keith. I think I met him when I was in the Contact. Walked into the Contact in Manchester years ago, like 25, 30 years ago, it must have been about 25 years ago. And the Contact just blew me away in terms of actually, you know, a venue that was really diverse, that put diversity absolutely at the core of everything that it did. It was incredible. But I think there's also another issue around theatre and the arts itself, and that's a class issue. And it's about actually who can afford to become anything at the moment. I could never ever have done what I've done if I didn't have the old enterprise allowance scheme, which kind of helped me. I would never have dreamt of going into theatre. And I still don't feel like I belong sometimes in terms of the arts. I think it's still a very, very middle class, a middle class kind of thing that when you look out, it's seeing people who are like you. And I think what we can do best in Liverpool is those voices that are literally leading the world at the moment. You look at Stephen Graham, you look at Jodie Comer, you know, my God, they are like, when you hear that Scouse accent, it just makes me so happy. But then you don't hear any Scouse accents really on the radio, on the television, on anything, on the media. You just don't hear those voices. So if we're not hearing those voices on our national media or seeing our faces reflected in the national media, then no one's going to feel like that they've got that opportunity. And I think that's where the kind of thing goes right the way back to schools, and how we can inspire, you know, getting great role models into schools to inspire young people to take that first step where they would never have dreamt to take that first step, and have huge ambition for themselves in that without having to kill their accent, which is a whole other thing. I think it's really important, but we've got a long way to go. And I really agree with you, Lynn, and I really hope that this won't set people back, because I think we are making baby steps. Some people made massive, big strides 20 years ago, and I think it went back over 10 years, and it's starting again. But where are regional accents on the media? Where are they? You know, and that is a class thing, and that's what we've got to really fight again, especially in cities like this, where our best talent comes from our poorest communities, and that talent needs to be allowed to thrive.
Thanks. I think those are both really excellent points. I think the whole class thing in the arts, it's noticeable in Liverpool, but so much more so when you go outside of the city, and particularly down south. And diversity, not just within the arts, but across the piece, is always one of the first things to be neglected when money is tight. But it is such a short-sighted kind of retreat, because as we know, the more diverse our programmes, the larger our audiences are. So just missing out on financial opportunities. So let's not hope diversity is rolled back as a result of this. Okay, we're nearly touching the hour, and I've got a question here from my co-director, Mike Morris, and just for once, I'm going to let him have the last word. And the question is, Arundhati Roy said the pandemic could be a portal to a new world, dependent on what baggage we choose to leave behind or take with us. What would the panel suggest the arts would leave behind? What should it take with it at the end of the lockdown?
Gosh. Do you want me to start?
Yeah.
I think what they will leave behind, what they should leave behind, is an isolationist approach, as in their own organisation, or that there seems to have been over the last 8 weeks a much more collective response. And Liverpool's quite good at that anyway, but I think nationally there's been a more collective response, and that's what we need to take forward, because we're going to need everyone's brain and everyone's ambition and everyone's heart to kind of face the next 7 months, because they're going to be, in some ways, going to be harder than what we've just gone through, I think.
Thanks, Claire. I mean, from a writing on the wall point of view, I think definitely what we should, there have been opportunities rising out of this situation. We've been able to operate much more internationally. We've had international guests, Noam Chomsky, who we wouldn't have been able to bring over for a live festival. And we brought in audiences from Mexico, Canada, Spain. And so I just hope that we are able to maintain those international, that international approach that we've been able to develop, which does, you know, increase the diversity of our offer. Lynn?
Yeah, I guess what I think the arts kind of needs to leave behind, I think, is exactly what Claire said, which is that kind of siloed kind of attitude. And I think that the future of the arts is networked, it's local, it's collaborative, and it's generous. And I think those are the organizations that will thrive and go forward into the future. And I think the thing that the arts needs to take from before the pandemic and into post-pandemic is, in fact, the fact that it genuinely has the ability to transform.
Have we lost Lynn?
When it is, completely embedded within local communities and is at its most generous.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And you have both been very generous with your time this evening on a bank holiday Monday. So on behalf of everybody at Writing on the Wall, I want to say a huge thanks for coming along, but also for contributing to what feels like a very important discussion with things that we as a sector, as audiences, as artists need to take forward. So thank you. And I will just finish off by reminding our audiences that we are accepting donations for this free festival. All donations are split between Writing on the Wall, fans supporting food banks, South Liverpool Domestic Abuse Services, and you can donate at the link which will come up on the bottom of the live stream. Also, please do complete our feedback form. What you think of our events is really important to us, and how they can be improved, what you'd like to see more of. And finally, I've mentioned some of our funders and sponsors, but I'd like to just formally thank them all now. Arts Council England, Liverpool City Council, the Institute of Creative Enterprise at Edge Hill University, Unison Northwest, and Liverpool John Moores University. So that's all from me for tonight. I've gone through all the events that you can come and join in on this week, and I hope to see you there. Thanks for coming, and good night.